I'd just like to welcome you all on behalf of Wycliffe College to our monthly theology pub night, and we're quite pleased tonight to have a Wycliffe alumnus, the Right Reverend Chris Harper, here with us today. We'll get to know Chris a little bit more deeply, but before we start, as our custom, I wanted to make a land acknowledgement. So we'd like to acknowledge that this land on which the University of Toronto operates, for thousands of years it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And a fun fact that I learned from Chris today, Terry, I think you have a little bit too much gain. Fun fact I learned today is you were saying there's 178,000 Indigenous people living in Toronto itself.
According to the 2011 long census.
Yeah,
yes.
so it's, yeah.
2011.
Yeah. Terry? Okay. I can hear a slight hum. There's a little bit too much gain on the mic. Yeah. Great. So maybe we can just get to know Chris a little bit better. And this afternoon we had a brief conversation, and he basically said no question is out of bounds, and we don't need to hold back. If you're curious, tonight we're going to have time for Q&A after. Feel free to ask any question you'd like, and Chris is gracious to provide his best answer, but he's quite a knowledgeable guy when it comes to a lot of these issues, and is a great resource, and we're really pleased to have him here tonight. And so just like to help me welcome Chris here tonight, Bishop Chris Harper. So maybe we can start, just tell us a little bit about your background, your life, and how you kind of came into ministry and into your role now as the Bishop of Saskatoon.
For sure. I am still fighting to recognize and understand the title, the Right Reverend Bishop Chris Harper. I am the 13th Bishop for the Diocese of Saskatoon in the province of Saskatchewan, and I have been the diocesan bishop there for now just over 4 years, 4.5 years now. And so I came in just before COVID hit, and it was one of those amazing experiences where, you know, you figure everything is just, you find your way through all of that, and then all of a sudden COVID hits. And so I struggled with the whole concept and the thought and the reality that I'll be one of the bishops that'll be remembered in diocesan history as not that one who has shut the churches down not once, but twice, but 3 times. And so hopefully that's not my legacy. But I am the, let's see here, I am the first Indigenous bishop for the Diocese of Saskatoon. I am about the 15th bishop, 13th bishop, I think it is, 15th? I'm not sure what it is, for the Anglican Church in Anglican Church history here in Canada. And I stand shoulder to shoulder with a great host and people who are making positive changes in understanding about Indigenous issues. And I'm blessed to be able to work with the Anglican Council of Indigenous Peoples, as well as with AIN, which is the Anglican Indigenous Network. I've also been blessed to sit on COGS for probably 2 to 3 terms, and as well as the General Synod Planning Committee, and it goes on and on. You don't need to know everything on all those, it gets kind of boring. But I was blessed to be the Indigenous priest for the Diocese of Toronto, which I did for 4.5 years here, and that was one of the wonderful blessings. But in becoming how does one go through all of this? I was one of the reluctant bishops, and I remember the call that I received when I was on holidays back home on the reserve. And they called me and they said, we'd love to put your name forward for a running for the bishop. And I said, cool, where? They said, here in Saskatoon, in the Diocese of Saskatchewan. Cool, let me think about it. And I prayed for about almost 2.5 weeks, and I just made the deadline for my curriculum vitae, my CV, and all the information that they needed. I never expected anything. And in fact, I told my wife of 42 years, I told her, I said, honey, I said, I never want to see a tear in your eyes, but I'll be honest with you, that my name's going to be up for the Diocese of Saskatoon as their bishop. But don't expect anything, because they wouldn't vote for the likes of me. And amazingly, I led from the start, and I'm not sure how it played out that way, but I was elected, I think it was on the 3rd or the 4th. And I remember going into the back room with the Metropolitan Archbishop Greg and sitting in the back there, and he says, we have a bishop-elect. And I said, oh, wonderful, that's great. And then he said, Chris, that's you. Me? And then I turned to my wife, Tracy, because she started to cry and have tears as soon as the first ballot came out, and I was in the lead. And so I said, you walk with me, because my wife has always been my side, and also at the same time been very much my right hand. And so she was right there with me, and I said, do they know what they're doing? So I've been bishop now for over 4 years now, and it's been an amazing growth, and I've been trying to do the best I can to try to teach about the commonalities, the journey that I've been on all my life of walking in two worlds. And I hail originally from Onion Lake, Saskatchewan, one of the conundrums of the world. It sits on the Alberta and Saskatchewan border. It has two Onion Lakes, sits on both sides. Alberta's side is what's known as Makeo, and the Saskatchewan side, a little bit bigger, is called Sikascooch. And Highway 17 runs right down the middle of the reserve, which is Highway 17. On the Alberta side is the area code 403. On the Saskatchewan side is 306. So it has two area codes. It used to be long distance to call across the road. My wife worked on the Alberta side, I worked on the Saskatchewan side. My kids went on to school on the Saskatchewan side. So we had two clocks, Mountain Standard Time and Saskatchewan Central Time. So the kitchen was Central Time, and the Mountain Standard was in the living room for the kids. And
well, at least half the time it was right?
Exactly,
So.
Where they coordinated and worked together, and we celebrated those days.
Well, the question is, which side is better? That's what everybody really wants to know, the Alberta side or the Saskatchewan side.
I'm not even going there. I'm smart enough for that. But it used to be fun to, like I said, long distance to call across the road, and we always had a lot of fun with that. Plus, we had a Saskatchewan postal code in the post office, which sat on the Alberta side. So the whole thought, even then, of walking in two worlds. Now, I've lived half my life on reserve and half my life off the reserve. Maybe just a little bit more off reserve now. And but I grew up in the ways we were just talking about just before this. Is that I grew up at a time when we would all put on our Sunday best and we'd go to church. We'd go through the Eucharist, we'd have the service and sing the hymns and thank the priest for a wonderful sermon. We'd all go out, and then we'd go back home, put on our regular clothes, and then we would go into the bush and then celebrate and go through the Indigenous traditional ceremonies. And so it was, even then, there was the two worlds. And I grew up on a reserve that did its best to try to amalgamate, try to bring in commonality the practices of both Christian and traditional practice. And so even for myself, even to this day, when I was young, before I went to school, boy, I'm going to be jumping all over the place. Try to keep up. When I was young, I had my braids, which were probably well below my belt. And I think, I remember the first time I had them cut to go to school, how traumatic that was for me. And so I was always one that always had longer hair. And it seemed almost as a punishment to have a haircut. And when I was allowed to be myself as the Indigenous native priest for the Diocese of Toronto is when I started to grow my hair. And I've kept my hair growing, and I keep it long for two reasons. Number one, it irritates the Christians. Even up to 2 weeks ago, when I did a service at my cathedral, boy, that's weird saying that, at my cathedral, and we had a visitor there who was with, and basically who said, somebody should cut that man's hair. And my wife said, you know, he's from Onion Lake First Nations, he's Indigenous. She said, doesn't matter, somebody should go and cut his hair. So how do we respond in a world today where to try to be ourselves? So I wear my hair long, and as I said in the diocese when I came in, I will keep my hair long right up until the time that it's not a conversational issue. I also keep it long and in a braid usually, but my wife's not here. It's a side trip. So only my wife, I've been married now 42 years with my beautiful wife Tracy, and only she has cut my hair in all those 46 years that we've been together. And only she is the one who braids my hair. When she braids my hair, every morning she says a prayer and a blessing upon me. Only then can I go out and do my ministry. That's how relationships work. That's how our relationships work. And that's the reason for the symbolism of a braid. It brings the individual, the other, and God into the relationship. The three coming into one, which is strong. It's also at the same time that of the church, the community, and God. All of us walking together and being one together. So as I'm away, because culturally and traditionally, usually you leaving your hair like this usually means that you're single and you're available. So I always have to make a disclaimer, I'm not. My wife would be the first one to say, no. So anyway.
So you talk a little bit about walking in these two worlds. In your younger years, like the tension between, you know, those two worlds, did you ever want to kind of reject or minimize your Indigenous heritage in school settings or in public, or what was that like, you know, being an Indigenous person in kind of broader Canadian society? Well, where I grew up was a community that was very few. I think we were probably the second Indigenous family that was in our town. And it was hard because I can honestly say I've been assaulted more than most. And at the same time, just because of the things that I've done in my life, I can say that I've now when I say this, I mean, let me put an addendum to it. For 20 years, I used to work EMS. I was EMT advanced, and I was also the supervisor, the program director, and I raised up the ambulance company plus first responders and emergency. And I did that for 20 years. And in that time, I was also working as the minister or the lay minister in charge on the reserve. And in truth, in all that time,
there was always the conflict of being who and what I am, as well as even growing up in school, the amount of times that I was assaulted just for being a dirty Indian and beat up for that fact until I got my size. So I'm 6'2", and that helps a little bit, deter from all those that would like to beat you up. And so anyway, long story short, I try to balance all of that out, but honestly, I've been assaulted probably more than most. Even here in the city, here in our own ministry, we call it street baptism. I don't know if you know what that means. Does anyone? Where you've been spat on? So I've been spat on and everything else like that for just being who and what I am. And so, yeah, for a lot of years, I really, really tried to be anything but. In fact, in most of my parishes, it was a point of contention for when, where somebody would ask, is your priest an Indian? And usually my parishioners would say, no, he's Portuguese. And so I've been an honorary Portuguese, anything, of wonderful, beautiful colors of this world. And I celebrated that because, again, I didn't want to acknowledge my indigeneity of who and what I am. I tried for the longest time to run away from what I was because it made it easier. And I don't think at the same time that I didn't really start to celebrate in who and what I am until I came to Toronto, when I started to see, a wider picture of what could be. And I celebrated that. And, even going through the college here, it was trying to find who and what my own voice was. Because again, I've, like I said, so at the end of this, I invite you to ask all the questions you've ever wanted to ask an Indigenous person. Don't think that it's going to ever try to insult, that's going to be insulting. People have tried, believe me, and they've done really good jobs to try to insult me. But there's nothing you can say that would insult me. And if you do, God bless you. That'll be the first. So, but the truth is that we try to find our identity, and that's where I'm at right now.
And do you feel like that's a common experience among Indigenous people in Canada? And is there kind of a generational piece to that, between older generations and younger generations?
Absolutely. When you go back to residential school, when we were the process of assimilation to try to make us into something we were not, to be much in the colonial system, to try to be anything but Indigenous, was one of those processes that caused an identity crisis to the point right now where we see it being played out in the young people themselves, where they don't know who they are and they're trying to find community, so much so that they find that commonality, they find strength, they find identity in gangs. And we see that being played out more and more now on the reserve, and with the gangs comes drugs and the violence, addictions, and it perpetuates the cycle of the abuse that has been already foundational in there from the residential schools. And this is one of those identity problems. If we can get back to finding out who and what we are and be proud of that. I know, with pride comes a fall, right? But it would help us to, at the same time, if we knew who we were, we wouldn't be searching. We wouldn't be fighting to be something else. And so that's one of the reasons you see with the hats turned, flat brim, that kind of stuff, trying to be anything else but Indigenous. I think that's one of the problems, but at the same time, trying to also find our story again. We talked about that, just before this, both Steve and I, when we talked about how people try to find their own voice, their own story. And what I mean by that is the story of who we are in our culture and tradition. Now with the Indigenous people, it was the elders, the seniors, who always had the history. They had the long thought, the long memory, and they would tell us who we're related to, how we got there, and at the same time, what our story is. And that would be passed on down to us. But with residential schools, all the children were taken away and they had nobody to tell. And so a lot of those stories got lost. And so we're struggling right now to try to find our story. And some of the nations are trying to discover those lost pages, if you will. You know, we hear about it in history, especially when we're looking at in the Atlantic region with Beothuk people who are basically almost eliminated. And how do we find those lost pages of that story of our Canadian history when there is no one to tell the story? And so we end up having to do side research, coming into a thought, a form, by coming in from it around the sides, collecting all the side stories, and then that gives us a theory, if you will, an assertion or a thought about what that story was for those people, and even for ourselves. And this is one of the things that, if anything, we, you know, as Indigenous people, we can teach back to the young people and to all of you and to all of you online, is treasure who you are. Treasure your story. Treasure who you are in your life, because as we said, you know, there's so much that is to be treasured. You know, and it comes from the stories we tell. You know, I'm Plains Cree, so we're storytelling people, and so we tell the stories. For example, how many of you play musical instruments here? Wonderful. God bless you. We have a great host here of musical people. So just, you know, online, for those of you that are online that play music, God bless you. But all of us, if you know, who plays the radio? But we all play a musical instrument. Did you know that? When we were young, in the womb, our heartbeat was that song we shared with our mothers. The same heartbeat. As soon as you took your first breath, your own song began. And that song is the one that you'll sing back to the Creator God, who will say, I know your song. Sing it for me. And you sing that every day in everything that you do. And that song is so unique. It adds to the harmony of all of creation. That's how special you are. And if we could tell this to all the kids, to all the young people, how special you are, so special that there is none other than you in all of creation. I firmly believe that without you, this world would stop right now. That's how special you are. That's how unique you are, and how special your song is in the song of creation. God needs to hear that. And if we could tell that story to everybody, how special that song is, how special you are, and that music that you sing every day. Is your song. Do you see how special a story is? How unique a story is? Every story that we tell, all the stories I tell you tonight, I give to you as a gift. It's up to you to share the story. It's up to you to live into the story. It's up to you whether you shelve it and put it away in the back closet, or else you tell others. And I pray you tell others, because if anything, you will soften their heart and you'll make them smile. That's the greatest blessing that we can all give, we can offer to life. But all of us are unique, and I think that's one of the things, especially when we talk about identity, how important it is to understand of who you are, where you come from, and the uniqueness of that story, the heritage. To be able to say, first and foremost, I am Canadian. But I also have, I'm West India. I'm also, I have African. I also have Kenyan, if you want to be more specific, or else if not that, South American. You know, go on. Tell the stories and celebrate, because you're acknowledging your ancestors and how important that is, because it was your ancestors' sacrifice that got you to this point right now. Celebrate who you are. Rejoice in who you are, how unique you are, and how special you are. So, but if we could all first and foremost say, we're Canadian, but I also have this heritage, I have this and this and this and this, how unique I am. It would be the same thing in faith. Denominations separate us. Or, you know, where we all say, oh, those Anglicans, oh, those Lutheran, oh, those Roman Catholic, oh, those United, oh, those, and it goes on and on. But if we were first and foremost to say, I'm Christian, oh, but I practice as this, we would start to recognize each other as brothers and sisters, as family. And we would embrace each other and honor each other with respect and dignity. We treat each other different because we are one in the family of God. Identity has a lot to offer, and identity is special.
I'm going to try, okay, let me try and weave two conflicting ideas together, and let's see if I can articulate this properly. So with the residential schools, and as you talked about, you know, the loss of story, and some have called it cultural genocide, and I don't think that's maybe even a strong enough term, you know, that can be used for that idea. The links to the Christian church as the perpetrators of that reality on Indigenous people in Canada. And on the other side, part of Christian kind of theology and tradition is, in some ways, in our encounter with Christ, we are given a new identity and a new story. And how do those, I guess, is there kind of a naivety, you know, in this kind of trying to create this new identity, that the church was kind of, maybe the theology was misplaced, you know, in their program at in the residential schools, and how do we kind of reconcile that, you know, now, this kind of idea of the new identity we have in Christ, and maybe our history and our uniqueness as, you know, individuals in the world? How do you kind of marry those two ideas? Did that come across clear or not?
Wonderfully, no. But but what I will say is this, is that we have an opportunity to, number one, to make the first steps in reconciliation. And reconciliation, if you take a look at it through the dictionary, it is a noun, which means bringing two enemies together, two conflicting sides together. And as I've argued it, we need to make it a verb, something we do, we live into. We need to do it every day, reconcile. It's easy to be reconciled with oneself, but it's difficult to be reconciled with another who's different from us, and especially who has different ways of thinking, different ways of practice, everything else. And I think at the same time, we have a lot to offer in each other, in understanding who we are. It's much the same as a buffet. If it was all one food, all macaroni salad, would you enjoy buffets? But instead, we get all this wonderful diversity of food, and that's God's celebration of how we come together. All this beautiful food and the beautiful ways of seeing things. And I think that if we could come to the table and recognize and celebrate who we are for what we are as well, and from where we come from, that would be part of that reconciliation. But what I'm trying to say in a round way of saying it is that, so for example, with the Indigenous people, we could teach the church about what it means to be a community, because we've been that in that all, you know, much of our existence. For example, I'm going to speak from the Plains Cree, because we We were a nomadic people, and we knew how important it was to be in community. And community was the only way to survive. As an individual, you died. You needed each other, the hunters, the gatherers, the ones who process food, the ones who process the game, so that we had clothing, we had tents, and it went on and on. We had the warriors to protect. We had all these different, everyone had their role, their place. So community was so important. If it was up to one individual who was exiled or who was discommunicated and pushed out of the community, that was certain doom. And we could learn from the Indigenous way, for example, of what it means to be in community. Come back together again. United we stand, divided we fall. And this is one of the great challenges that we have within the church of today. It is so about me, myself, and I, so much so that we're willing to sacrifice the ways of the church. We're willing to even stand up to God and say, you're going to be and do it our way. Rather than say, what is God calling us to be? What is God calling us to do? I think at the same time, to be able to understand that we play a part in the unity of the greater whole. It's not about what I deserve, my rights, but what do I owe you? What do I owe the community? And if we could go into the world like that, it would be about respect. It would be about dignity. It would be about reconciliation, forgiveness, and love. That everyone has value, everyone is loved for who you are. It's not about making you to be like me, but celebrating who you are, because together we're stronger.
But wouldn't you say, like, now the prevailing attitude in our culture, both within the Indigenous community and outside of it, is that the church is everything that's not? You know, the church had its chance and it destroyed cultures and peoples and ruined families. And so why should we turn to the church in hopes of reconciliation? You know,
and this is why I'm saying this about community, is because I've said it many a time to many a group and many places that I've been asked to speak. It's easy to find an angry Indigenous person who's more than willing to make you all suffer, punish you for the wrongs of the past. It's hard to find a person who is trying to bring everybody together, trying to find the paths of reconciliation, find the paths of bringing in the greater community. And I think, especially with the wrongs of the past, as we all know, we can't change the past, right? The past is, but we can learn from the past so that this way we don't do that again. That's why it's so important that we learn from the past, but not keep our focus on it. Otherwise, we're going to be tripping up always in the future. I ask anybody to try to go home tonight looking backwards. You're going to run into something, or else traffic's going to really love you. And you know how much everyone just loves a pedestrian, the crosswalk, here in Toronto. So, but it is important how we try to learn from the past. And there are those that are more than willing, because they're broken, they're hurt inside, and they want to punish somebody, anybody. And I think even they are the first to admit they need healing too. But reconciliation is that all of us coming back to the table to be able to talk about the wrongs in the past and to try to correct them, make it better. In the Indigenous, we talk about the 7 generations. It took 7 generations to get here. It's going to take 7 generations to get out of this again, to a point where we come to a place of healing for all peoples. That's a long time, isn't it? 7 generations. Just for all those that have ever asked me, oh, come on, how long do we have to keep doing this? That acknowledgement that that Steve read in the beginning, we've heard it so many times. How long do we have to keep until you accept it? Indigenous people are First Nations, we're here. You know, just as a side trip, you know, my wife Tracy, if you're watching, I love you, honey. She always panics when I go on what she calls rabbit trails. In other words, I'm supposed to be preaching about this, but oh, this is interesting. Rabbit, follow it. And anyway, so one of the rabbit trails is Thanksgiving. Everyone have a good Thanksgiving? Most nodded yes, everyone online. And, but most of my family don't celebrate Thanksgiving, because Thanksgiving itself is a time of a reminder of oppression. It's much the same as even with my relatives in the United States, Columbus Day. Christopher Columbus. The Indians found him because he was lost, right? You know, when he comes on, he goes, oh, India, these are Indians, you know. And, you know, when in actuality, and everyone going, what did he say? But again, you know, how can we try to find and remedy, I'm not going to say sanctify, but make right the past? We have to acknowledge the past and move into the future. Always keeping our eyes on the future, but acknowledging the present. So when we use the acknowledgement, as you read, those are words. And as one who is, we said it probably about almost 10 years ago, we are a treaty people. Remember those words? Does anyone know what treaty means? Yeah, well, yeah, it's an agreement, right? Between people, the government, and at the same time, us coming together. No, the treaty. Yeah, the Trinity. Oh, don't get me started on the Trinity. But yeah, I agree. You know, so anyway, we are a treaty people. In other words, living into the treaties that were signed, you know, at the beginning. I come from the Treaty 6 people, the Plains Cree. And Treaty 6 was basically, you know, it goes back and it shows these two, the settler on one and the Indigenous on this side. And they both have a foot up on a mound and they're shaking hands as equals. And that is a symbol of treaty, the Treaty 6 people. And the treaties were meant and put it there as a sign of respect for each other. But the treaties were never adhered to. So going way back when, so the treaties were signed, we were supposed to receive 1 gold piece, which was equal to $5 at that point in time. Now that 1 gold piece is worth roughly about $1,786. So every year I receive rent for Canada, my wife and I. And we go through a whole process. So I walk up and I go back home to the reserve. Hopefully you love stories. I'm a story person. I love to tell stories.
I like stories.
And so every year I get to go back home. I stand in line for a long, you know, for probably about 10, 15 minutes on the reserve. And then I get to the first table and it's usually the Indigenous government on the reserve. And I go, oh, hi, and usually it's my cousins. How you doing, cousins? Yeah, hey, shaking hands. When you back? Oh, you're back, Chris. How is everyone treating you in Saskatoon? Really? Oh, okay, you still want to live there? Oh, yeah, that's great, you know. Okay. And they sign, cross my name off, and they pass me over to the next table, and I go back to that one. And that one is the municipal government. And they say, okay, Chris Harper, can I see your ID? Okay, there's your treaty card. Okay, thank you. They highlight my name or put a check beside it, and I sign there. They pass me over to the provincial. I go to the provincial table. They said, oh, Chris Harper, okay, thank you. All right, would you sign here? Okay, I signed there. Then they pass me over to the federal. I go to the federal table and Chris Harper, thank you very much. Cross your name out. Open up the little steel box, take out a crisp brand new $5 bill, hand it over to the RCMP who's in a red serge, you know, the beaver hats and everything else like that, and black boots up to here. He reaches over, thank you, Mr. Harper, there you go, and he hands me my new $5 bill. And I usually get another $5 bill for my wife Tracy, who sits with my relatives on the side. So I take my $10 and I walk over to the next table. I hand it over to my cousin, who hands me a hamburger, a bag of chips, and a pop. And I go, that was fun. So this whole process for rent for Canada. So Canada is still part of ours. We're still here as Indigenous peoples, as a treaty people. And how do we live into that? That comes from the stories that we have, to try to redeem the past, live in the present, and look forward to the future. And I think it's so, so important not to be able to either neglect, negate, or hide the past, but instead to recognize it and learn from it. And that means acknowledging those hard words and that sometimes very ugly word of assimilation, that of genocide, that, how we as human beings are the worst perpetrators of violence to our own brothers and sisters. Humanity, what we do to each other just because we're of a different tribe, just because we're of a different nation, just because we're of a different ethnicity. When in actuality, we should look at each other and see a child of God in the family of God. So to be able to say, I greet you, all of you, my relatives, and you are my family. And how big and beautiful this family is, especially on this beautiful little marble we call Earth. We think of ourselves so local, so small, in just this one area, when in actuality, God sees the bigger picture. So just in case you ever wonder why God doesn't answer your personal prayers, God answers all prayers, but God, who is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, in all time, in all things, in all places, and is all powerful. God can answer every prayer, but not as you expect, and in the time that you want. God is so powerful, God can answer your prayer, even in the past. Blows your mind, doesn't it? God, who is God, I am. So, with all of this, you see, start seeing that time is not important, but what we do in this moment will make or break the world. So, looking at it that way, that's why it's so important that we don't focus only on the past. And that's why, especially for the people that we have in the present, it's so important, especially for the kids today, to embrace who you are, not only in your nationality, but for you as an individual, and come forward with that. So, like I said, when I said this, I gave everyone else the forewarning before we sat down here this evening, was that, yes is the easy answer. If you want a more complex answer, the answer is no. And you see it being played out now, right? So, so hopefully I got a little bit of the answer that you're asking. And if I've still got you wonderfully confused, that's good.
No, I think this has been great. Would you join me in thanking Right Reverend Chris Harper? You're welcome to grab some more beverages or chat. We got 3 bishops in the room, so I don't know if that's a quorum for something exciting, but we can see what happens. But yeah, thank you so much for coming, and thanks for those online that joined us. We'll see you next time.